All right, so you wanted to take a closer look at this article about Kamala Harris's upbringing.
Hmm.
And let me tell you, this piece from Breitbart News, it really goes there.
It does.
Like, it covers everything from her childhood all the way to being VP.
Wow.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see how someone's early years might have influenced their outlook later on. Not about judging or anything,
No.
but just trying to understand the context, you
Uh,
know?
Totally. And this article really hones in on that. They point out how Harris often calls herself a daughter of Oakland, right?
Yeah.
Emphasizing this like middle-class upbringing.
Right.
But then they lay out all these details that paint a very different picture. More privileged, you could say.
It's like they're presenting these two contrasting narratives.
Exactly. And that's where things get juicy. Like, take her early years, for example. The article mentions that, yeah, she was born in Oakland,
Okay.
but her family actually lived in Berkeley at the time. Even her own father said so in his writing.
And that's a significant detail because even back then, Oakland and Berkeley had really distinct vibes. Different demographics, different reputations. Location can play a huge role in shaping your experiences growing up.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just Berkeley either. Her family moved around a bunch. The Midwest, then back to Berkeley, always seeming to land near these big-name universities. Makes you wonder if that kind of environment rubbed off on her at all.
Totally. Imagine being surrounded by that world constantly. The academic circles, intellectual discussions, it definitely shakes how you view things.
It really makes you think about that whole American dream idea. Is it really about upward mobility, or are some people just starting the race with a head start?
That's the question, isn't it? And this article seems to suggest that in Harris's case, those advantages were definitely there.
Totally.
Uh,
And speaking of advantages, the article drops this interesting tidbit about her schooling. Apparently, she went to a private school before that whole busing program kicked in.
yes, the busing program. A huge attempt to tackle segregation in schools.
Hmm.
This little detail the article throws in really makes you think. Especially since Harris has talked about being one of those working-class Black children who were boozed.
It's definitely a point of tension they're highlighting.
And it's an important one. It forces us to grapple with those complexities of social mobility, how individual experiences intersect with these larger societal issues.
It's not just black and white, right? There's a whole lot of gray area in between.
Exactly. And understanding those nuances is crucial if we're trying to get a complete picture of someone's background and how it might have shaped their worldview.
Okay, but get this. The article then talks about how Harris would spend weekends with her dad in Palo Alto,
Interesting.
which back then was basically synonymous with affluence, right? A far cry from that image of struggle she sometimes embodies. It's like they're highlighting this disconnect between her lived experience and the image she projects.
It is interesting how they weave these seemingly disparate details together to construct a narrative.
Right, and it's not just Palo Alto either. They mention trips to Jamaica and India too.
Now, that's fascinating. Those exposures to different cultures at such a young age must have had some kind of impact.
Totally. It adds another layer to that whole daughter of Oakland thing, right? Because it's just one piece of a much bigger global puzzle.
It reminds us that people are multifaceted. Their identities are shaped by this tapestry of experiences.
Okay, but hold on to your hats, because this is where the article really leans into what they call Harris's privilege. Ready for this? They bring up her summer job at McDonald's.
The McDonald's job. A classic way for politicians to try and seem relatable to the everyday American.
Right, except the article implies it was probably more for extra spending money than actual necessity.
Okay, I see where they're going with this.
Right, and get this. They emphasize that the only two McDonald's in that whole town were conveniently located by a beach and a state park.
Okay, yeah. It's all about crafting that narrative, isn't it?
Right, like look at her working a regular job.
Yeah, okay.
Except not really.
It's subtle, but it feeds into their larger point about the difference between perception and reality.
Exactly. And that difference becomes even more glaring as the article chronicles her housing journey. We're talking a condo overlooking Lake Merritt in Oakland.
Don't forget the trendy Soma neighborhood apartment in San Francisco. They made sure to highlight that prime location.
Of course. And then ultimately her move to that luxurious DC condo, you know, the one with all the zeros on the price tag.
Right. It highlights that financial gap between her and the average person, which ties back into that whole question of representation. Who is she truly advocating for?
Right. Because if you're living that luxury lifestyle, can you really grasp the struggles of everyday people?
Mm,
Or is it all just for show?
those are the questions they're raising.
And they don't stop there. They keep circling back to this idea of Harris associating herself with Oakland, even in these small, seemingly insignificant moments.
The strategic use of birthplace and upbringing. It's a tale as old as time, or at least as old as politics.
Right. But what's interesting is how the article contrasts those frequent Oakland mentions with her seemingly fewer and fewer references to Berkeley as her political career took off.
That is an interesting observation. It almost seems like a calculated shift in how she wants to be perceived.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder why the emphasis on Oakland over Berkeley. What's the strategy there?
Well, to understand that, we need to think about the connotations those two cities carry, especially in the political sphere. Yeah, it's interesting how those two cities right next to each other have such different vibes.
Yeah.
Like Oakland, it's got that working class image, strong sense of history, diversity, activism. It's faced its share of struggles, but there's this resilience people associate with it.
Right.
Berkeley, on the other hand, it's more about academia liberalism.
Right.
And let's be real, a little bit of elitism thrown in there.
Yeah, and that makes it even more intriguing that the article points out how Harris seemed to mention Berkeley less and less as she climbed the political ladder.
It does make you wonder if it was a conscious choice.
Right.
Aligning herself more with that Oakland narrative, it could be a way to connect with a wider range of voters, especially on a national level.
It's like she's shaping how people see her.
It's politics 101, really. Crafting a story that resonates with voters. And sometimes that means emphasizing certain parts of your past while downplaying others.
Makes you wonder how much is genuine versus how much is all strategic.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we should all keep in mind when we're consuming political news and commentary.
Totally.
Yeah.
But going back to the article for a sec, they don't just focus on her geographic ties. They also dig into her time as San Francisco's district attorney.
Oh, right.
They even bring up this local paper, the Sun Reporter,
Okay.
which pointed out this contrast between where she set up her campaign office, this forlorn area of Bayview Hunters Point,
Right.
and her own upscale living situation.
Yeah, it's a classic move. Setting up shop in a location that reinforces a certain image, even if it doesn't quite match your own reality.
It's like they're implying this disconnect between her actions and her image.
Right, and they keep going with that line of questioning when they talk about her time as Attorney General.
Right.
Remember that anecdote about her phone call with Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase?
The one where she took off her earrings?
Exactly. And the article makes sure to add the Oakland in me. They highlight these little details, these seemingly insignificant moments, to suggest that maybe Harris is code switching, adopting a different persona when she's dealing with powerful people.
That's a bold statement. And whether you buy into their interpretation or not, it definitely makes you think about the different ways we present ourselves in different situations.
Absolutely. We all do it to some degree, right? Adjusting our behavior and how we communicate depending on who we're with.
Yeah.
The question is, at what point does it become something more calculated? Something that raises questions about authenticity?
That's a fine line.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's up to each of us to decide where we draw it.
True, true.
We have to be critical thinkers, especially when it comes to politics.
Yeah.
We can't just take everything at face value.
So we've talked about her upbringing, her housing choices, that strategic use of Oakland versus Berkeley. It seems like this article is building a case that directly challenges the Image Harris projects.
And one of the key ways they do that is by highlighting the financial gap between Harris and the average American. They talk about her husband, Doug Emhoff.
Right. The Hollywood entertainment lawyer.
Exactly. And the lifestyle that affords them.
It's like they're saying, sure, she talks about understanding the struggles of everyday people, but look at how she lives. She's part of the elite now.
It's a powerful argument, especially in a political climate where economic inequality is a major concern for a lot of voters. It makes those carefully crafted moments like the McDonald's anecdote feel even more calculated.
Totally.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder if the goal is to connect with everyday Americans. Are these carefully crafted narratives actually effective? Or do they just ring hollow?
That's the question, isn't it?
So bringing it back to you listening, how much weight do you place on a politician's background?
Is it about where they come from or the policies they support? That's what we have to keep in mind as we unpack not just this article, but all political coverage.
It's not just about the story itself. It's about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And sometimes to really grasp the bigger picture, we need to dig a little deeper into the background, the context, the nuances that we might not immediately see.
Okay, so we've established that this article is challenging the narrative surrounding Kamala Harris.
We have.
But there's another layer I want to peel back here.
Okay, I'm listening. What's caught your eye?
So the article delves into Harris's family history.
Oh,
And it's actually pretty fascinating. We're talking about her dad coming from a family of former slave owners in Jamaica,
Wow.
and her mom being the daughter of an Indian diplomat. It adds a whole other dimension to the story.
It really speaks to the complexities of identity, doesn't it? We
Yeah,
often think of it in these singular terms, but Harris's background is this tapestry of cultures, socioeconomic background, global experiences,
totally. It makes that daughter of Oakland label seem almost well reductive.
because it is just one thread in a much richer, more intricate tapestry.
Right. It's like she's a walking embodiment of intersectionality. And it makes you even more curious about how those different parts of her identity might have shaped her worldview, her values, even her political choices. Yeah, it's like we've uncovered this whole other side of her story, this blend of Jamaican and Indian heritage. And the article even mentions how she spent time in both countries growing up.
It really makes you think, how did those experiences, those exposures to such different cultures and viewpoints, how did that shape her? It's tough to say for sure, but you can't deny that it could have had a big impact.
Right. It's like growing up with two completely different sets of spices in your kitchen. You're going to end up with a unique flavor.
I like that. That's a good analogy. It speaks to the richness and complexity that diverse experiences can bring to a person's worldview.
Okay, but here's where it gets even more interesting. The article talks about how Harris's mother, even though she wasn't black herself, made a real effort to immerse her daughters in black culture.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. It highlights how much upbringing can shape not just who we are, but how we see ourselves.
Right. And it circles back to that idea of nuance we were talking about. It's not always straightforward, this whole question of identity.
Absolutely. And the article really drives that point home. They quote this historian, Charles Woolenberg, who said Harris was raised primarily as members of Berkeley's highly politicized black community.
Wow. It makes you think about how our backgrounds and our environments all mix together.
It's different for everyone.
So we've covered a lot today. From those early years in Berkeley to her time as district attorney and everything in between, we've talked about privilege, strategic narratives, the complexities of identity. And it all started with this one article that really took a deep dive into Kamala Harris's past.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating. But it's important to remember that this is just one perspective, one interpretation of events.
Right, and that's kind of the beauty of these deep dives. We're not here to tell you what to think, but to give you the information and context so you can form your own conclusions.
Exactly. Think of it as a jumping off point. What resonated with you? What surprised you? What questions do you still have?
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, it's up to each of us to decide what we make of this information and how it shapes our understanding of Kamala Harris, both as a politician and as a person.
And maybe even more broadly, how we view the role of personal narratives in the public sphere. It's something to think about.
It really is. It's been quite a ride unpacking all of this.
Yeah.
We went from middle class to international schools, ballet lessons, with a Russian ballerina, million-dollar condos. You really never know the full story, do you?
You really don't. There's always more than meets the eye. And sometimes digging beneath the surface can reveal some fascinating and unexpected things.
That's the truth. And for you listening, the deep dive doesn't have to stop here. What parts of Kamala Harris's story are you most curious about? What other perspectives are out there? Keep those questions in mind as you learn more and form your own opinions. That's all we've got for you today. But like always, keep those deep dives going, and we'll catch you next time.